Maybe you're one of those people who reflects on COVID lockdown as a moment of tranquility in a world spinning too fast.
Oh, it smells acidic already. The fermentation is happening. It's so exciting.
Maybe you remember it a bit more like this.
Australia's most iconic beach, Bondi, has been closed down.
22,000 fines have been handed out over the past 3 weeks.
Australia, which had the virus under control a few months ago, is now locking down a major city in the face of a second wave.
With hundreds of anti-lockdown protesters clashing violently with police.
The work from home order has been extended.
The trend is a COVID hangover, and it's here to stay.
For anyone trying to work from home at the same time as educating children, caring for vulnerable family members, dealing with the collapse of a small business, or all of the above, Anthony Albanese has a sobering message.
We need to examine what went right, what could be done better with a focus on the future, because the health experts and the science tells us that this pandemic may well be, indeed, is not likely to be the last one that occurs.
That's why, according to the Prime Minister, we can't just forget COVID and move on.
One of the things that didn't help during the pandemic was the sort of activity like when the federal government supported Clive Palmer's legal case rather than supported Mark McGowan and the actions that the WA government were taking.
Visas, vaccines, the Australians who were stranded overseas, JobKeeper, the creation of a national cabinet and the decisions it made. All the big Commonwealth calls will be considered. And if you listen carefully to what the Prime Minister's saying, he thinks this is how we get Australia on a war footing.
We're vulnerable for shocks like a pandemic, and there could be other shocks as well where some of these recommendations could be relevant, be they the issue of cybersecurity or the issue of international conflict as well.
But here's what the inquiry won't be looking at: curfews, school lockdowns, padlocked playgrounds.
You won't be able to go to the pub because the pub is shut. That doesn't mean you can have all your mates round to home and get on the beers. That's not appropriate.
You cannot leave for work in those local government areas until July 30 at least. We will also make sure that only critical retail remains open.
I just say to New South Wales, they need to get it under control. Rather than playing whack-a-mole, they need to kill all the moles.
The PM has decided the inquiry will look only at Commonwealth decisions and those calls made by the state and territory governments in collaboration with the feds. That means it won't look at decisions or actions made by state or territory governments unilaterally. And it won't be hearing from the premiers who made the big calls during COVID-19, the calls with the biggest impact on our day-to-day lives. Melbourne suffered the world's longest lockdown, more than 260 days across 6 lockdowns.
Oh, it was traumatic.
Damon Johnston is the Australian's Victorian editor.
Like everyone else in Australia, we embraced, or at least dealt with, the first lockdown that was 40-odd days, and I think everyone would consider that to be probably a reasonable decision all the states made and the Prime Minister made at the time. But after that lifted, every other lockdown was a decision unilaterally made by Daniel Andrews, and it was made to try and fix the problems that his decisions and his government created.
Remember hotel quarantine? In Victoria, it was a catastrophe.
It was his government that decided to employ private security guards. So they were his private security guards that leaked the virus, or are responsible for the leak of the virus, from there into the community. That is blamed directly for the deaths of 800 people. Now, I think Victorians deserve to know what really went on. We had our own pretend inquiry, the Coat inquiry, that Andrews ordered, and remarkably, no one could remember whose idea it was to employ private security guards.
The other decisions Victoria made, mirroring the big calls made by Liberal Premier Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales, are the ones that have the most lingering impact.
the closure of beaches, the padlocking of playgrounds, and I think most significantly, and this is where the Prime Minister really has let the next generation down, the month after month after month of school closures and home learning. Now, in Victoria, this has had a devastating effect on hundreds of thousands of students, and we don't know what the full impact on those kids will be for perhaps years to come. So in my view, having endured it with kids at school, as many, many other Victorians did, I think the Prime Minister has really let Victorians down.
The PM says it won't be a witch hunt against his predecessor, Scott Morrison.
The public service did a remarkable job as well. I think that Scott Morrison did the right thing by convening the National Cabinet. That was a good decision. I believe the federal government got it right in making an early call on the pandemic.
But he got annoyed when journalists kept asking whether other heads of government, like state premiers, could be compelled to appear before the inquiry.
Well, I should imagine that everyone will want to participate in this. I've seen some of the commentary this morning that I find pretty extraordinary. Although consistent, I guess, with the way that they operate, that the Coalition have criticised this before they've seen the terms of reference. The Coalition are addicted to saying no to everything, and that's why I think the Coalition of yesterday have been turned into the no-alition of today.
Here's what that so-called no-alition are saying.
Either the Prime Minister's been rolled here by Daniel Andrews and the Premier of Queensland, or the Prime Minister is just happy to make a mockery of his own words before the election.
The PM was asked why this wasn't going to be a royal commission, which has the power to compel witnesses to appear, among other things, and he said it was because royal commissions can tend to drag on for many months or years.
We needed a fully empowered, resourced royal commission. Doesn't matter if it was going to take 2 years. This issue around a time frame is a red herring. Let's do it properly. Employ a former High Court judge who has no skin in the game when it comes to validating decisions his profession or her profession may have made when it comes to epidemiology or health decisions. This needs a legal mind, aided and informed by independent medical and science experts to get to the bottom of what went on. The premiers need to be brought before that Royal Commission, properly constituted one, as do their health bureaucrats.
Coming up, so what's the real reason for holding this inquiry? The inquiry will be led by 3 experienced women: Robin Kruk, former head of the New South Wales Department of Health, epidemiologist Professor Catherine Bennett, and Dr. Angela Jackson, an economist. Dr. Jackson, who was locked down in Victoria, expressed some pretty frank views during lockdown on Twitter. Here's a voice actor reading her words.
It's time to bloody step up, Sydney, because personally, I could do without lockdown 5.0. To the group of 6 adults that my husband asked to either mask up or leave the middle of the playground yesterday, thanks for being irresponsible adults and making our kids' lives that little bit harder.
There have already been at least 20 inquiries into the handling and impact of COVID-19, including by state parliamentary committees and departments. So why have another one? Well, it was a pre-election promise. Here's Anthony Albanese in July 2020.
We've been very concerned that people have been allowed back into Australia in the early stages with no restrictions at all. There wasn't even temperature testing, and that was something that we continued to raise with the government, and they said, oh, it's all okay.
You've been around politics and politicians for a very long time, editing Victoria's main paper, the Herald Sun, and of course working at the Australian. What do you suspect is the real reason for having this inquiry if it's not going to look at the decisions that really affected people's lives day to day?
He had made a commitment to hold an inquiry, so I think he had to deliver on that. We all know what happens to political leaders who don't deliver on their promises. It's a breach of faith with their electors. So I think what he's tried to do here is have a bet each way. He's tried to tick the box. Yep, I've delivered on another election promise, but do it in a manner that protects what were overwhelmingly Labor premiers. Not universally. Obviously, New South Wales was a Liberal government and mistakes were made there, as were mistakes made in South Australia with another Liberal government. But the big beneficiaries from the Prime Minister's decision are Daniel Andrews, a Labor Premier, someone he is close to. Mark McGowan's legacy, he's no longer in power. But it was Mark McGowan, remember, who cut WA off, robbing many, many families of the opportunities to see elderly relatives, perhaps for the last time. So the massive economic, the massive social, and I don't think we've seen the full impact of this, particularly on our kids yet.